Let's now bring you that much anticipated exclusive interview with Nobel Laureate Professor Wole Soyinka. Earlier on, we had a sit-down with him to speak to the issues around the declaration of a state of emergency by President Bola Tinubu, the suspension of a governor and the House of Assembly, the appointment of a sole administrator, and even his well, would I call it the way he rates this government? Remember, he said he wasn't going to rate in just 1 year. He was going to wait until after then. So we asked him that all-important question as well. So take a listen to that interview we had with Nobel Laureate Professor Wole Soyinka. Well, there's a lot going on in the nation today, one I'm sure you're fully aware of. We're going to start off with the situation with River State, the president declaring a state of emergency. You're not new, by the way, to speaking to events playing out, particularly in River State during the administration of Goodluck Jonathan. You also spoke to that, and well, you had very strong words for President Jonathan then. And that, of course, started this trend online of late with people asking, where is Professor Soyinka? I know you're probably not too familiar with social media, but that's been a trend. Where is Professor Soyinka? And we thought to just bring you on board to have that conversation with you. So, Prof, seeing the declaration of a state of emergency by President Bola Tinubu and the National Assembly approving this, by the way, the NBA described it as unconstitutional. What is your take on this, Prof?
Well, let me begin by answering, just touching on that question, where is Wole Soyinka? That's the job of you, journalists in the media. Keep looking for me somewhere up in the air between what countries and the other. And you find me located in one airplane or airport, minding my own business or other people's business, of course. But seriously now, I have to warn you that I have been very, very much withdrawn from the internal affairs of a number of states simply because I have not been in the country. I've been doing a number of projects outside. Now, let's get to the issue which brought you to me this morning. First of all, there's an issue of the Constitution. Is the president's action constitutional? And I hope the affected politicians, governor and representatives, that they test this all the way up so that we get a clearer picture once and for all. Instead of running around in circles from regime to regime, it should be possible by now for one to be able to say confidently that this action is illegal, is unconstitutional, or otherwise. So for now, we're going to leave it to the constitutional lawyers to guide us. Now, the next question is it politically wise? In my view, this takes us on a slippery slope. It's not what I would have liked to see happen right now with all our struggle to attain a federal structure. The spirit of it, in my view, is contrary to the spirit of federalism. Now, especially very carefully and deliberately, because this does not vitiate maybe the rightness of the action. It does not establish the wrongness. But with my commitment to a genuine federal structure, when an event like this happens, I say we're back on the slippery slope. And I hope that it is tested all the way, because as I've said, we've been through this before under different regimes. It's either we have a decentralized federalist structure, or we have a quasi-dictatorial, whimsical kind of government which just panders to the political leaning of whoever happens to be in charge at the moment. So that's my take on it. Obviously, I'm going to go deeper and find out just what on earth has been going on in the River State that led to this, what I consider an unfortunate step in our federalist journey.
Prof, so what would you say is the thinking of the president? Because there are people that have argued outrightly that it's wrong to have declared a state of emergency, although it's within his rights, according to Section 305, to declare a state of emergency. They say the activities or the quote-unquote insecurity hasn't hit a threshold to declare a state of emergency. On the other parts, they are also disagreeing with him strongly and sternly to the effect that you cannot, in the guise of declaring a state of emergency, quote unquote, unconstitutionally, now say you can suspend democratic structures like the governor or the House of Assembly of a state. He was vehemently opposed to this when it happened, when he wasn't president, and now he's at the vanguard of it and has gotten the endorsement and the approval of the National Assembly. What do you think he saw, read, and understood in terms of briefing that made him to go ahead and do what he has done?
Yeah, we keep tackling this issue in bits and pieces. Take my own state, for instance, when some years ago the governor locked up, and brought federal might to make sure that the House of Assembly was locked up so that the elected people could not bid. We've had similar activities. I've fought former presidents who sent troops to, for instance, during the protest in Lagos, without the authority, without even the request of the governor. That was when Fashola, I remember, was governor, and I strongly objected to that. Objected to Obasanjo's attempt to, shall we say, colonize Lagos state. You remember that period when the present president was the last man standing, effectively. And so I cannot divert from that inner commitment of mine to separation of powers, to the enthronement and practice of genuine federalism, where governors are well and truly in charge, as sort of junior partners of a collective form of governance. And so any action like this one, any action which vitiates that federalist principle is, for me, not acceptable, it's unfortunate. However, remember, I keep saying, I do not know enough about what has been going on in the Rivers State. It brings us back to this, to what we've all been screaming for years under successive governments. Let us, for heaven's sake, just meet in a genuine spirit of federalism and restructure this nation. We've said it, they told us we're lunatics. Each head of state, each politician, when they get there, they change tunes, and suddenly this restructuring thing takes back seat. I've been expecting, for instance, this president to make it one of his priorities so that there's a clarity. At the moment, there's just too much energy, time wasted in treating the situation piecemeal. We read about governors bulldozing houses of assembly. In one case, I remember one state, the governor took off the roof of the assembly. He didn't knock down the house, he was very careful. He just took off the roof and made sure the elected people could not meet. Well, this action is of the same kind of temper in my view, but of course, qualitatively different. So it's not, I'm not dodging the issue, but it's not a clarified situation for me right now. But once again, I say any action which reduces the collective commitment to a federalist structure is most unfortunate and should be reversed in one way or the other as early as possible.
Well, Prof, there's enough out there to speak to as far as the political situation in Rivers State is concerned, one of which I'd like you to also respond to is the appointment of a sole administrator who is a former vice admiral, retired, albeit, and there's been a lot of talk about that approach being a militarization of the situation in Rivers State, following which there has been a deployment of troops, and many have weighed in on this, as against what the Constitution provides, that the National Assembly should be the one, to make laws for that state in the case that the State Assembly is unable to, meet and deliberate for the state. Don't you consider this a paradox of some sorts, considering that this measure, resorted to by a president who, was once in the trenches against military rule in the country?
Well, we've been running a diarchy for decades here, ever since the military first stepped in. My preference always is take off the uniform, even when it's in camouflage, even when it's changed to civvies. I call them the militarization, those soldiers who, quote unquote, never die and never quit even civilian politics. But we're talking about a very minor issue. Once you have a confidence in some individual and you are in charge of a large entity and you want somebody whom you think has demonstrated the most reliable and judicious capabilities for tackling national issues, the business of this ex-military and so on, becomes sort of, shall we say, a distraction. It's just, it's no longer viable. I know what my preference is, of course. I want the military just to go home and sit there in their barracks permanently.
Well, there's some who would listen and say, your tone is quite different. Naturally, we understand that you're over 90, so, I mean, you don't want to stress a lot, right? But this is different from...
Hallelujah. You recognize I'm over 90. Thank you very much. Treat me like an old man. I'm listening.
Well, it's really hard to tell. We just rely on the numbers, but it's really hard to tell. But some would say in 2013, listening to you speak at Freedom Park, there was Mr. Falano beside you, and you spoke to President Jonathan then. In fact, you asked him to call his wife to order, described as murder in the cathedral. It was a very, strong, I want to call it exchange, but what you spoke to, you used strong words, and you didn't leave any stone unturned. You didn't mince words in that sense. But it's quite different now. And some will say, is it because of your relationship with President Bola Tinubu? Is that what is responsible for that? Because a lot of people say the president is also being partisan, he's being partial. He didn't mention the minister of the FCT in his statement calling for the state of emergency and the suspension of the governor and the assembly. So do you find fault whatsoever in the president for this, for some of those issues? And is this as a result of the relationship you have with him?
Please, let's not go into my career. Because if you do, we're going to stay here, and I will have to catalog one by one in numerous interventions which I made, even regarding those you cited, which you know nothing about. I don't operate only on one level. I think it's the Einstein who said that anyone who sees a problem tackles that problem the same way, with the same material, and expects a different result must be a madman. I happen to agree with that. And I use different methods. I'm participating in World Day of Poetry today, as a matter of fact. I have one or two things to say there. I'm appearing at the United Nations in a few days. I'm addressing the General Assembly. I have a few things to say on world affairs. In other words, I am sort of multifaceted. And people should stop, bothering about I did things one way at one time, do it differently. You haven't heard from me. My constituency has been growing instead of diminishing with age. It's been getting larger and larger. And people must stop expecting me to be a Freedom Park, sort of at the head of a demonstration or supporting this. No, I use different methods all the time. So my relationship with the president, it's totally secondary. Let's not even go there at all, because otherwise we'll be subjectizing what really is a serious national issue. All I can say is that we are handing the baton over to people of your generation, and it's up to you people to make use of what we have been able to contribute, during our existence, as to study very, very carefully some of the things we've done, analyze them far more carefully than emotionally. That's what I would say on that issue. If there's an emergency, obviously, then, and I'm around, then I'll speak. If, however, in Acapulco, you expect me to jump on a plane and fly back simply because you have an emergency. I think we should clarify once and for all.
All right, Prof, we're going to come to your assessment of the president's performance, because you had told us at the very beginning that we should give at least a year before you can give your take. And it's almost 2 years, maybe you have a position. But I want you to also, on this issue that is quite divisive by what we've seen across board, we're expecting that the National Assembly will reflect that division. Some are for and against. They are for and against the issue of declaration of emergency, as well as the issue of suspending the governor and the deputy, as well as the House of Assembly. But what we saw at the National Assembly was a bit surprising to a lot of people who would have felt that that would have reflected. But they were literally, quote unquote, borderline unanimous to get the two-thirds majority in both houses, and no strong opposition in that sense. There's a quote by the Prime Minister of Barbados, Mayor Motley. She says, "Principle only means something when it is inconvenient to stand by it." And this is what Nigerians would have expected, whether the majority had their way, but minority should have had their say. And they refer to this National Assembly as rubber stamp. What do you feel, and how would you describe what has played out in the National Assembly, and how would you describe it?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. I was shocked by that. I was watching. This situation is actually a few days old. And I was watching what action will be taken by the House of Assembly, by Senate, and even by the affected politicians in River State, whom I expect to be in the court by now. Because above the principle, above the president himself, there's the law. And I expect those who are affected to take the primary step. You use the word rubber stamp. Well, I wouldn't go that far, but let me confess that I was surprised at the ease with which this emergency law, that step, was applauded and passed. And then the critical question, even within the powers of a president on a democratic dispensation, there are areas of discretion. And you're quite right to point out this wholesale suspension of everything to government. I think that's an over excessive response within the rights and the powers. We're assuming now, let's say that the president is constitutionally right, but within his powers, there are also areas of discretion. And I think that the wholesale scuttling of the democratic existence in the rivers was excessive. I think it could have been managed much better, much more economically. I think the president did not sort of curb the extent. He didn't economize on his presidential emergency powers. On that issue, I agree with you absolutely.
So, Prof, some would disagree with you and say that your relationship with the president really isn't secondary, that it's primary, particularly as it has to do with these issues. And this is where we come to your promise to assess the president after 1 year. It's been more than a year since the president has been in office. So Nigerians are waiting with bated breath to see what indeed Professor Soyinka's assessment would be about the president's performance in office so far. And apart from his assessment as far as the socioeconomic situation is concerned, would like you to also speak to the president's disposition towards federal appointments as it has to do with federal character. Many have said that Mr. President has put in place most of his appointees are from the Southwest. What are your thoughts on this?
If you keep bringing up this issue, I'm obliged to respond. Let's try and isolate. This is not the first president who has former comrades on the battlefield. And there are other people who are his comrades when they fight against Abacha and even against democratically elected presidents who tried to completely scuttle the powers, not just of state governments, but of local governments. And we also have a situation in which even the governors themselves, remember the siege of Anambra, for instance, is more than one way of scuttling, the powers, the autonomy, shall we say, relative autonomy of states. So I keep saying, and this is not, and I get tired of repeating myself, that it's about time we took a holistic approach to this and sat down and correctly and rationally restructured the nation. Now, you say that he's been putting his own people in power. I'm sorry, I have not studied the extent. I don't know what the legitimacy of that is. But if you want to make a presentation to me later on, and let us look at it, believe me, I will immediately make my position quite clear. Now, when one says, let me go back, when one says, I'm not speaking for the first year, the same principles are adopted with former presidents, whether you're talking about Buhari or you're talking about Jonathan. In this particular case, as a matter of fact, during the demonstration when the police shot and killed some demonstrators, remember, I had to break, quote unquote, my vow of silence. So there are always exceptions like that. At the same time, on the other hand, I've not swallowed an alarm clock. I don't see why I should put my alarm on and say, okay, 1 year is past, now I must make an assessment. If there's nothing I really feel like talking about, and if I'm busy elsewhere, I'm teaching elsewhere, I'm earning my living up till now elsewhere. So this business of, you haven't come to make this, I don't understand it. Other people are doing the same. This is a collective effort. The panelists speak consistently, the Bayous speak consistently, the showers come out and try to lead demonstrations. It's a collective effort. And I choose, according to my energy and my priority, projects which I have universally, globally. And I think it's time that is recognized and respected. People should stop trying to work out my timetable for me. You're free to impute motives to the structure of that calendar. That's their business, not mine. I know what I'm contributing.
Well, Prof, I know you'll understand why a lot of people want to hear your rating of this government. Of course, you said it, that you're not in the practice of rating the first 1 year. So are you saying that you want to push this forward, or you'd rather not even talk about it at all, just to be clear for people watching?
Let me ask you straight away. The 1 year is up, which means you have a right and I have a responsibility to respond when you call me on certain issues. But if you're saying that I would call a press conference and say, now 1 year is up, let us now make an assessment. The only question I'll ask is, did I do that with Jonathan? Did I do that with Buhari? Did I do that with Obasanjo? Did I do that with anybody? So why is it expected of me? All it means is that 1 year is up. If I'm around, you want to get hold of me, I will speak. That's all that statement meant.
Right. So, Prof, we've been able to get a hold of you, and we would really like you to speak.
Sorry, hold on.
We would really like you to speak to it.
I have to run on an appointment now. I have an event this afternoon. You are invited to it, World
Poetry Day. Yes.
Day. And I have a statement to make there, incidentally. I use opportunities as they come. So come to that one. And I had some statement that which might interest you.
Prof.
And after that, I have another at the General Assembly in New York. Pay attention to it. The next one might be in Australia. You know very well I live in the plane.
All right, bro, 2 things I would like you to speak to. Let's use the privilege we have before you go and, make your presentation. So 2 questions I want you to respond to. First is the fact that the economic policies of the president is biting very hard, and it's been difficult for Nigerians, which is why perhaps they're expecting you to speak, given the fact that the president has promised these are short measures. These are measures that will be painful in the short term, they'll be better in the long term. But given the fact that there's nothing new about such promises from politicians, Nigerians, some don't seem to believe. And they're just angry at the economic hardship. So I'd like you to speak to that as well in responding.
Yes, you want me to speak everything. I'm telling you, I have an event I have to go and prepare right now. Abi? Okay, just after that happens, I will continue this conversation later. I know you want to continue eternity. No, I have to go. You told me 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Here we now, nearly 50 minutes.
All right, Prof. It's understandable. Today is World Poetry Day, and we don't want to take anything from you, but we have to thank you so much for your time. You said some very instructive words that the younger generation should learn and study the things you did. Maybe they can come up perhaps with better measures to approach things. So yes, we'll be doing the studying, and we say thank you for your time. We'll be speaking with Nobel Laureate Professor Wole Soyinka, not just on World Poetry Day, which you'll be hearing about, but on the state of the nation at large. Thank you, sir, and all the best in the skies.
Okay.
And that's been that conversation with Nobel Laureate Professor Wole Soyinka on the state of emergency in Rivers, the aftermath, and of course his rating of President Bola Tinubu's administration. We'll take a quick break now, and when we return, we're back with more conversation. Stay with us.